Now, remember when we were talking about take your money out of the bank day? That was Saturday on November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day, V for Vendetta Day. And the corporate media was saying, oh, it's not going to have an influence. It's not going to have an impact. Well, we're finally figuring out what's going on. 650,000 customers of the too big to jail banks apparently moved a total of $4.5 billion out of the big banks and into the smaller community banks and credit unions. That's the total for the last month. We don't know how much of it was done on November 5th, but that's how much was done. So the word is getting out and people are doing it. And the big banks are trying to say, well, we don't really care. We'll just go to the Federal Reserve and get more money to replace it all. But remember, more money from the Federal Reserve is more debt as opposed to a tangible asset, which is people bringing money in the front door and putting it on deposit. And remember, these banks are so highly leveraged that a single-digit drop in the worth of their assets can render them insolvent. So we're actually seeing banks that are trying to literally beg people, don't take your money out. We'll give you a toaster. We'll give you a calendar. We'll let you take the teller home. And, just all this kind of desperation there because they're still trying to play the game by these rules that were made up to make the rich very, very rich. And your ordinary banks are beginning to understand that little circle that divides the insiders from the outsiders is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And a lot of these financial people who thought they were on the inside of that circle and going to make out really well, now they're finding themselves on the outside where the rules are working against them. And they're still trying to play by the rules. But at some point they're going to realize these rules are just, they're arbitrary. They're made up. They're not real. They're not carved in stone. Actually, even if they were carved in stone, it's still an arbitrary creation, a myth of how things are supposed to be that keeps us all under control, like the myth of rule by divine right, which was carved in stone and a complete fantasy, or the myth of chattel ownership of your person, which was often written in iron chains and was still a myth, and we understand how that works. So, anyway here, moving right along. Over in Europe, the European debt crisis is clearly spinning out of control. Remember, earlier in the week, Deutsche Bank was saying they could be in full panic mode by the end of the week, which is tomorrow, and it looks like it is probably going to happen. We are hearing persistent rumors that France and Germany are already in talks about breaking up the Eurozone. We already know that Germany started printing Deutschmark notes in order to replace the euro, to drop that whole euro coin system and go back to their own internal currency. I presume France is already doing the same. They're going to need to do that. And these are going to be government-issued currencies without a private central bank. So this is a major, major disaster for the money junkies. And now it looks like the whole European Union may start fragmenting. The repercussions of that when we come back from these commercials.
That's 877-342-6673.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the problems over in Europe and the Eurozone and the various debt. We've all been focusing on Greece and their default, and the Papandreou telling the Greek people, you are going to be allowed to vote on whether you want to basically live the rest of your life in poverty, to placate the bankers and get us out of trouble. And then the bankers came in and said, no, the people aren't allowed to choose. That's kind of stuff. And they got rid of Papandreou, and they've put a banker. Now, they're trying to put this banker in charge of Greece, which is like, the Federal Reserve deciding to fire Barack Obama and put Ben Bernanke in the White House. I mean, that's the degree of desperation to prevent the people of Greece from having any say at all over whether they should be enslaved to pay off all the losses from Goldman Sachs' cheating of the Greek government. That's where it all began. This is not money that was borrowed to spend on infrastructure or improve the lives of the Greek people. This was Goldman Sachs helping the government that was before Papandreou to hide the debt so everybody could look good, and in the process just created even more worse debt that led to the crisis in Greece. Now, Greece is only 2% of the total Eurozone economy. So that's bad enough. But over in Italy, this is where things get really bad. Italy is the third largest economy in the entire Eurozone. It's a major, major player, and people are hitting the panic button over there. First of all, because Italy's debt has never been managed since the European Union was created. Second of all, because they're seeing what happened over in Greece, where the people of the world are starting to stand up and say, I will not pay for the criminality of Wall Street any longer. They're not just saying it in the streets of America. They're saying it all over the planet. And the message is getting out there. So the panic has basically come in. All of the people who have loaned money to Italy, they're not sure they're going to get it back now. And so what's the first thing they do when a creditor says, I'm not so sure I'm going to get my money back, the risk is now greater? They raise the interest rates. And they turn their fear into a self-fulfilling prophecy, because Israel was barely hanging on before when everybody was giving them low rates on the new loans, and everybody thought somehow this will work its way out. Somebody will find that pesky 11th marble, and all will be well. Well, not anymore, because now the interest being charged on the Italian debt all by itself has just gone way too high for Italy to even be able to pay. And it looks like Italy is going to default, and the repercussions of that default are going to make Greece's problems look like a Sunday afternoon picnic. Now, what does that mean for the United States of America? Well, it's really very, very simple. Remember, we have been talking about those nasty credit default swaps where these too big to jail banks in the United States of America go out and they sell these little insurance policies that people can buy. And unlike ordinary insurance where you have to own the thing that is being insured, like if you want to buy fire insurance on your home, you have to own that home. Credit default swaps, you can buy insurance on things that are going to happen, which is, it's more gambling than insurance. And there are trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in these credit default swaps on the European sovereign debt. And if Italy defaults and the Eurozone shatters and France and Germany go off and do their thing and they let Greece and Italy collapse, that sovereign debt is basically worthless. And all those people who've been buying those credit default swaps from Goldman Sachs and all these other players on Wall Street, they're going to be knocking on the doors and saying, we want our payouts. You sold us a credit default swap. You bet the sovereign debt would hold together. We bet that it was going to collapse. We're right. You owe us several $1 trillion. More than several. It's a huge amount. I forget the number off the top of my head, but it's an amazing amount of money that's on the line here. And because credit default swaps are an unregulated financial industry, these companies that were selling these credit default swaps do not have the cash reserves on hand to pay off on these policies, on these derivatives. That's what sank AIG. AIG was selling credit default swaps on all of these fraudulent mortgage-backed securities. And while everything was bubbling up, everybody was making tons and tons of money. But when it started to unravel, AIG just didn't have the money to pay all the claims coming in. And that's what's going to happen to Wall Street. So what's Wall Street going to do? They're going to do what they always do. They're going to go up to Washington, D.C. and say, please, sir, I need another bailout. We really meant well. We're good people. We're doing God's work. And you got to get those Americans to cough up another couple of $1 million each to cover these trillions in losses. And the U.S. government will say, sure, you've been really good people. And they'll send the army out there to start confiscating your gold and your silver and your copper and your who knows what all else. Because back in 2008, the federal government, when it had an opportunity to rein this in and shut it down, failed to do so. And now they're committed. They will loot the entire American population. Your gold, your silver, your Timex wristwatch, the flatware in the kitchen, your cars, whatever. Your safety deposit boxes at the bank. Everything will be taken to try and clear off all these debts for those poor old people down there on Wall Street. That's what's going to be coming. And that is basically going to signal the end of the United States of America and private central banking. Because that is what lies behind all of this unpayable debt all over the world. Private central banking, like the Federal Reserve, the IMF, the ECB, the World Bank, they all operate the same way. They create the money out of thin air. They loan it out at full value plus interest. And the trap is, the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that bank than is actually in existence. And the debt just grows and grows and grows and grows. And if you take a national indebtedness times 100 years, you understand why we're in this mess. It is time to pull the plug, say it's a failed experiment, and go back to the economic system that worked in 1779. We'll be right back. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. We've got John in Florida. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Is it true that the only three countries left in the world that aren't Rothschild centrally bank-controlled are Cuba, North Korea, and, surprise, surprise, Iran?
I don't know if it's that bad a situation yet, but it could be. And, you know, I don't think it's necessarily an issue of the Rothschilds Bank as it is just in general that whole model of a private central bank issuing the public currency at interest. What is really scary is that our nation is willing to go to war and murder millions of people to force this banking system on other countries at a time when we see it destroying our own. What is going on with the minds of these people? Are they drinking their water from those old lead pipes in Washington, D.C., and it's rotting their brain?
I quit paying my mortgage 4.10 months ago because they got bailed out. So you can't have the money in the house, right?
Yes.
And everybody tells me, oh, come on now, John, you're retarded. How can that be? I'm right.
Well, it's a very complicated situation. I know there are a lot of people who are not paying their mortgages because they can't. I know there's a lot of people who've just quit paying because they're tired of the system. I know that tax noncompliance is something like 40% now of Americans who are supposed to be filing taxes and paying taxes just aren't anymore because they're fed up. They don't have the money. They're sick of the paperwork. They're sick of the IRS and the TSA and the rest of it. And I don't think we're going to have to worry about any of that stuff much longer because when the Eurozone fractures under all of this artificially created debt, under Goldman Sachs criminality and under the corruption of the European Central Bank, you're going to see France and Germany go right back to government-issued value-based currencies, and you're going to see all of this whole system all around the world is going to collapse. Every country understands the reason they're in trouble is because of this private central bank model. I was looking at photos coming out of Greece from all their protests. Inevitably, there was a sign, IMF Get Out. Stands for international. You can fill in the other words for yourself. We understand that we are enslaved under an artificially created set of banking rules. Our schools brainwash us into thinking this is the way it's supposed to be. Just like earlier educational systems brainwashed us into believing rule by divine right and rule by chattel ownership of your person. None of them are legitimate. It doesn't serve the people. Our nation fought a war to be free of private central banking. And then the private central bank kind of kicked up a war, to try and take us back. That didn't work out. So they come in and they bribe our government to create the first Bank of the United States. That almost wrecks the place. Then they create the second Bank of the United States. That almost wrecks the place until Andrew Jackson shuts it down. Then in 1913, we get the Federal Reserve. It's the same scam all over again. And we are sold into the bondage of the bankers by a president and a Congress who knew they were never going to live long enough to see the bad stuff happen. Well, the bad stuff is happening right now, and it's happening all over the world. When Europe explodes, Wall Street is going to melt down because there isn't enough money on the planet to cover all of these credit default swaps. And we need to be ready to basically, as it comes crashing down, there's going to be some very, very difficult times. We need to be on guard because I will tell you right now, as soon as the dust settles, you're going to see the money junkies back out there saying, we can create a new private central bank. We can be printing money and just handing it out and loaning it to you in just a matter of a couple of days. And we need to basically tar and feather and hang anybody making that suggestion. We need to go back to the financial system that worked for the people of the United States in 1779. We need to go back to the system that worked for the people of Germany in the early 1930s before the bankers started boycotting Germany to shut that economy down. We have seen it throughout history over and over and over again. This is supposed to be the beginning of the third millennium. Have we not learned to keep money addicts away from the centers of finance? Well, I don't want to encourage people to do something that's going to get themselves hurt, because one thing that we can count on this government to do, and they're already doing it with the Occupy protesters, they'll get their little uniformed assassins together and they'll gang up on one or two people to make an example out of them. We know that in a full-on frontal line-on-line fight, the U.S. government and the money junkies can't win. There's only a few of them, and there's a lot of us.